welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we take horror films and turn them into drinking games. We're your two hosts. I'm Tucker.
And I'm Alex. Today we will be making a drinking game for Paranormal Activity 2, directed by Todd Williams. The writers for this movie were Michael Perry, Tom Pabst, and most notably, Christopher Landon. Landon moved on to be the writer for the rest of the franchise, as well as directing films such as Freaky, the Happy Death Day series, and Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse.
Paranormal Activity 2 is a prequel to the first movie starring Katie's sister Christy, who recently gave birth. Christy, her husband Daniel, and her daughter-in-law Allie all start to witness odd occurrences in their house. Over time, they start to notice that they are being haunted by a demon, and it only wants one thing: Christy's son, Hunter.
The timeline for these movies is a bit confusing because it is a prequel, but it still makes much more sense if you see the original movie before this one. Still, there will be spoilers for this movie and the previous movie, so watch out for those from here on out. If you want to rejoin us after you watch the movie, we will post the drinking rules we have made for this movie on screen now. With that out of the way, let's move on to a breakdown of the rules.
So just like the first one, this first rule is death, and again, there's not a lot of deaths in this movie. There's only 2, so it's twice as many as the first one, I guess. But just like the first one, this one also happens at the end of the movie. Like, all the deaths happen at the end.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be a continuing theme throughout the franchise.
Yeah.
I don't really see in any other movie if there's going to be more deaths, like, earlier on or later. I feel like all the deaths in all these movies are going to happen at the end.
I kind of feel that way too. I haven't yet seen the later half of the franchise yet, so I obviously can't say.
Yeah.
But I kind of have that hunch too, because it's like that for the first, 4 at least.
Now let's move on to the next rule, which is screams, cries, and yells, which there is 19 total sips.
I don't even know if I swallowed him right.
There's really not a lot to say about this rule, so let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, the next rule is whenever a jump scare occurs, and this happened 11 times. And for me, the one that sticks out the most is the one where all the cabinet doors fly open. I feel like that was the most effective jump scare.
Yeah, it was very sudden. I don't think anybody really expected it watching for the first time. I think the actor was actually told that maybe one of the doors would fly open, but all of them flew open.
Okay.
So I think the reaction was genuine. It's safe to say.
Yeah, no kidding. I didn't actually know that. That's interesting to find out.
Moving on to our next rule, which is whenever paranormal activity occurs, you take a sip, which came to a total of 19.
Yeah, and it's pretty much the same as last one. It's, whenever something goes bump in the night or people getting dragged down a staircase, like everything in between. It's pretty straightforward, and yeah, nothing else to say, so we'll move on to rule number 5. It's whenever somebody talks about the entity that's haunting them. This time it gave us 10 sips.
Yeah. It can be referred to as kind of anything. I think we clarified this in the last one. So, for example, if they call the entity an it, then that refers to the entity.
Yeah, exactly.
What's Daniel Ray and his brood doing?
Oh, apparently we have a ghost. Did you hear about this?
I did not. Please elaborate, because that's a very strange thing to...
A couple pots fell off our pot hanger thing.
no, you definitely have a ghost.
Straight to ghost.
Now moving on to another rule that was from our last installment, which is whenever there's a night number, you take a sip, which came to a total of 9 sips.
Yeah, and this is again just kind of a scene transition, title card. I don't know exactly what you call it, but it just shows what number of night they're on. It's pretty straightforward. I'm not sure if it's going to be a thing throughout the entire series or not. Like I said, I haven't seen the last 4, but at least up to the 3rd movie it's involved.
Yeah, I really don't know if it's up until the 4th, 5th, 6th. I have no idea. You're on the same boat as me, man.
Yeah, so I guess we'll find out if it's coming back in future installments or not.
Yeah.
Anyways, moving on to rule number 7. It's whenever somebody mentions the camera. And this was again a rule we used in the previous one, but this time it happened 8 times.
Yes, and I believe this was less drinks than the last movie. I don't remember by how much. All I remember that I'm pretty sure that last movie was one of our highest counts because Katie was constantly mentioning Micah's camera. Mika's camera, sorry. But you didn't really have to mention the camera too much just because they were security cameras, so they were kind of always rolling. So you didn't necessarily have to directly refer to them.
Yeah, and like people weren't mad at somebody else that was recording most of the time.
Yeah.
Like Katie was with Mika.
Moving on to the next rule is whenever the past is mentioned, you take a sip, which came to a total of 6.
Yeah, and it was one less drink than the previous movie, which is kind of surprising. I know this movie does take place in the past, but it's not very far in the past. It's only like a few months or whatever. And the fact that, like, you know, Christie's past isn't talked about more often when she was not even in the first one, but she was in the second one, it was a little surprising to me, but I don't know.
Yeah. It was surprising for me for different reasons. I'm just thinking of, like, the actual direction they wanted to go with the franchise, how they kind of wanted to make it their own universe. So in saying that, I'm kind of surprised that they didn't mention, like, the past more, kind of leading on to, like, a third Paranormal movie, which they ended up going to the past again.
Yeah. Moving on to rule number 9, it's whenever the footage from the camera in Hunter's room is shown, and that gave us a total of 18 sips.
Yeah, these last 2 rules are Hunter related, so just prepare for the next one as well. But I feel this was kind of guaranteed to have at least 15 sips in there. We kind of knew this going into the rule, because a lot of the hauntings do happen around Hunter.
Yeah, and like, honestly, you probably could have picked any camera specifically, and it would have given you at least 15, just because it cycles through them so much. But the reason we chose Hunter's room specifically is because obviously he's the one being targeted more than anybody else, so the plot revolves around him, which it's obvious why we included him as the camera to focus on, I guess.
Now let's move on to the last rule, which is whenever Hunter is said, you take a sip. And this came to a total of 11 sips.
I went through the entire family line, and Hunter is the first male to be born on Christie's side.
Yeah, pretty straightforward rule. I guess there's nothing much to add, so we'll just go right into the totals. The total number of drinks for this movie was 113, which is just a bit under 4 standard 12-ounce cans based on our 30 sip per can scale.
So drinking for the movie this time around wasn't too bad for the most part.
No.
I guess obviously whenever a night starts, there's always a sequence of events that leads up to more drinks, such as screams, jump scares, paranormal activity, I guess the night number itself, and the camera in Hunter's room.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, I think it's beginning to be a trend for now in the franchise at least, because that's obviously where all the spooky shit happens.
Yeah.
Anyways, just moving on to the movie itself, I guess. It's basically the exact same movie as the first one. Like, it's almost a carbon copy. They obviously throw in more characters with this one. There's a whole family involved rather than just, 2 characters, or maybe, I guess 3 with the side characters or whatever. But, like, it's so hard for me to differentiate these 2 movies because they're so similar in tone. The way that everything unfolds is so, like, identical almost, and it's hard for me to say which one's better or worse just because they're so similar.
Yeah, it's really hard to distinguish which movie you think is which. Some of the jump scares you can kind of make out, like, which happened in which movie, just for the main fact that the layout is different. That's the only reason, really.
Yeah. Well, actually, with that even being said, it's been so long since I watched these movies, like, the first time around when they first came out, and now rewatching them for the episodes we're making, like, I was thinking of the cabinet jump scare specifically when I was watching the first one, and it didn't make sense, but I was like, when's that cabinet scene happening? And then later find out that it's the next movie. So, like, looking back on them, it proves my point that they're just pretty much the same movie.
I feel like the difference between this movie and the last one is, I feel like in this movie they're kind of going in more blind. The only person that really sees what's going on is the very stereotypical, might I add, Mexican nanny who warns them about the entity, and then she gets fired.
Yeah, and I think that's because of the dad being the typical skeptic that we see in these movies. In the first one, it was Mika being the skeptic.
Well, it wasn't even he wasn't skeptic. He was just trying to provoke the demon.
Well, yeah, but he was provoking it because he didn't believe it, I would say. But I guess the thing that they changed, because they had the family aspect, there's more characters to work with. The dad was the skeptic, and then Allie, the, I guess, daughter, and Christy were just being told to ignore it the whole time, as opposed to the first one where Mika was provoking it. So.
Yeah. And I guess the difference is the only one who fully kind of believed the entire time is Allie, or didn't want to, like, kind of ignore it and sweep it under the rug, was Allie. But Allie's a child, so she didn't really have control. In comparison to, like, Christy, who knew it was there but tried to ignore it, take her sister's advice.
I think she just mostly repressed the memories of it happening in her childhood too. So she was trying to, like, actually deny its existence. Like, she wanted to believe it wasn't real,
Yeah. So one thing that I liked about this movie in comparison to the last one is there was a good reason to have the security cameras. They were introduced because the dad wanted it set up because their home got invaded, so everything was trashed, everything was broken. So they kind of wanted to catch the people responsible or make sure it never happens again, felt unsafe, so they set up cameras everywhere.
Yeah, and it's just a more believable setup rather than, in the first one, Katie was feeling this spooky stuff going on, so Mika just wanted to record that spooky shit.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a little more unbelievable, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. This makes just a lot more sense, I think.
And I guess with this movie, maybe the build-up was a little better since it was happening to separate people rather than like just one, with it being Katie in the first one. This one, they had the daughter, the mother, the maid, Hunter. Like, there were several people being affected by it, so it made the build-up, I guess, a little bit more engaging after seeing the first one. Like, they obviously changed a few things from the first one because they had more characters involved, but yeah, this was just one of those few things, I guess.
Yeah. I know something else that they did in this movie. I think there was a lot more things that were happening in the daytime.
Yes.
So one example of that was obviously the cupboards was probably the big jump scare of the movie. One other thing was, I know things were happening kind of around evening time, like 11 p.m.
Yeah.
That was happening too, which honestly, and I think the last installment, there was basically just anything like 1:30 to like 3:30 pretty much was pretty much the only hours. There was the one time where it was like breathing on her hair or something like that, on Katie's hair, but that's pretty much all that there was in the first movie.
Yeah, in the first movie, it pretty much exclusively happened at night, and then this one did start introducing some of the, daytime paranormal stuff. Again, it's just a minor change from the first one. Like, they had to change some things, but for me, it wasn't enough to make it. It wasn't enough to differentiate, I guess.
Okay.
Which I guess leads us right into the overall thoughts of the movie. So what were your overall thoughts, I guess?
Again, I feel like why this was so short is because it's kind of the same movie, as you said. The best thing that they did is I feel like a lot more things were well polished. Like, the acting was better. They had more clear reasons on why they were doing things, such as like the cameras being just in the house.
Yeah. I agree with you that it did feel more polished, and I think the reason for that is there was obviously a bigger budget for the movie. Like, they had barely any budget in the first one, like we talked about in the episode that we released yesterday. But for this movie, it was successful. The first one was successful, so they had a much bigger budget to work with, so they had more people involved. The camera setup was way better for this one. It was more believable to set up. And just like all the paranormal stuff that was happening, you got to see it a lot more front and center, rather than just hearing things, So I do agree that it was more polished. But that being said, I think it was just the same movie for me. And like I said in the beginning, I don't know which one I like better because I like them equally the same. I guess I might give the upper hand to the first one just because it was the first one. It did it first. So, that being said, there wasn't a whole lot for me to say about this movie, like you mentioned.
I feel like the only other thing to add is, like, I feel like this one just has a better sense of realism just because everything was done better. It was more believable. You can kind of see it from the dad's perspective, him wanting to prove the ladies in the house wrong with shooting the pool cleaner out of the pool, trying to have a logical explanation for it, which works, weirdly enough. For, like, in his mind anyways. So I like it just a little bit more for the realism, I'd say.
For me, the thing that makes the first one feel slightly more real is it feels like amateurs shooting it on their home camera, home video recording, whatever. So that makes it feel a little more real to me, just because it is it's just like me grabbing the phone and just recording my house. It feels like that, so it feels a little more genuine, like it is actually unfolding before you. That's just the way I look at it, though. I do know what you're saying.
So now let's move on to the award ceremony, where we award one not-so-lucky nominee, the Darwin Award. This award goes out to a character that made a stupid decision that resulted in them getting killed, somebody else getting killed, or simply resulting in something bad happening that could have been easily avoided. This award can also be given out to a character that is just plain dumb. Here are the nominees.
Today's first nominee is Daniel, for firing Martine even though she was trying to protect the house and living in a constant state of denial that there was an entity in his house.
Next, we have Ali for playing with an Ouija board and wishing that her house was haunted. If she would have wished to be any superhero, our money would be on Batman, because both of her parents are dead because of the ghosts haunting their house.
The last nominee we have is Katie for telling Christy to ignore the hauntings, when that is one of the worst things that she could have done, considering she had to take her own advice in the first movie and ended up getting possessed.
And the winner is Daniel. If he accepted Martine's blessing or gave anybody else the time of day to accept that the house was being haunted, he could have likely saved himself, his wife, and his child.
And with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our look into Paranormal Activity 2. If you end up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below. Also let us know in the comments what you thought of this movie in comparison to the first one.
Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on tomorrow's episode, where we are going to be making a drinking game for the third installment for the franchise. If you want to check out our most recent video on Paranormal Activity, click on the box on the top right, or if you want to see a playlist of all the drinking games and horror movies we review, click on the box below it. Thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying,
Cheers to fears.